working on making a sheath for this big apocalyptic chopping axe blade thing. But anyway, the pattern I have here is basically the shape of the blade is this inner line. I added about a 1/2 inch on it. I also added a little bit more down here on the cutting edge side, except for the tip and back here. So once it's all the way in, it'll kind of lock into place. But that extra space is so that it'll draw out easier because of the curve of the blade. If you left it straight, you would be hitting something trying to get that to pull out. So you have to leave a little bit of extra room to get it to pull out of there. Otherwise, the top of it is very similar to what you would have on a holster. And I've got a little bit added on up here to make a tab to flip over. I did not cut that to length yet because that's probably a little longer than I want it to be. But we'll see where it winds up and what we have. I'm going to cut this out of really heavy stuff because this is a thick blade. So I want to use some lightweight skirting that I have here that's probably about 12, 13 ounce. Might not even be lightweight skirting. But anyway, that's going to be the next step. Probably going to be more on this monstrosity to follow. In a different video. Just want to take a long strip and shape it to these edges. Have it come together here at the bottom to make my spacer. That's way easier than cutting a big huge chunk of leather like this and wasting most of it. And just use our strap cutter here to whack a strip off the edge of this side. Alright, that's more than enough of that. Alright, I've got some scrap leather here that I cut off a side for cutting lace. This is the belly of the side, basically. I'm going to use it to line this because, you know, why not? Probably doesn't need to be lined. Seems like not that type of sheath, but you know what? Let's go ahead anyway. It'll make it even thicker and heavier still. I'm just roughly cutting around. I've marked very roughly around it. Give myself plenty of room, and I'll trim that off after I glue it on the back of the other piece, as I usually do with linings. Trying to cut them exact just causes more trouble. This stuff's gonna be scrap anyway. Might as well. As before mentioned, this is gonna wrap up and around to catch on to be a snap to hold the blade in. So it needs to wrap up over that and over this. There's going to be a spacer piece inside, but I'm not worried about that right now because the blade's the spacer on this end. So I want to go ahead and make this fit about where I want it to go. Decide how long I want it to be right now. And it isn't much too long. It's a little longer than I want. I want it to go probably to about there. And the snap to be somewhere in here. We're just gonna push on through that real hard, and then I got a mark there as well. So that's figured out, next we figure out what I'm going to stamp on this, or tool on it, or something. Okay, let's go ahead and cut this off. Easiest way to do that is with a strap end cutter here. Now that I got that cut to length, now I've got my stitching groover set to where it'll go in the middle of this strap that I cut. So pretty much we're going to just use that around the edge, and that should wind up with our stitches right in the middle of that, if we get close to lining it up with the edge at least, which shouldn't be too far off from that as we glue it in. And we're going to go all the way around because I am planning on lining this. So I need to stitch the liner to the places that don't have the welt behind it. And of course we're going to bevel our edges. Probably going to be sanding a bunch off of them later and have to bevel them again, but I like to have them beveled now. At least some places I won't have to do that, like along the top here. Alright, since this is such thick leather, I'm going to wet it pretty heavily, and may wet it several times and let it soak in before I actually carve it. But let's mark some stuff on it. So, I'm going to have a snap here. I want to put a ring around that snap. An area I don't carve. And that's just about right for what I want to do. Put a line inside my stitch line there a ways. Alright, and I have decided what I'm going to carve. Somebody out there will probably get this without having to have it explained. But I've got this little cartoon dude with a copy of the weapon that I'm putting in this. And I'm going to call it a weapon. Of course, fitting with the post-apocalyptic theme, the little cartoon dudes from the Fallout series. Okay, swivel knife work. One thing about cartoon characters is they're pretty much all hard lines, so everything gets cut. This one has some interesting little bits, but for the most part, pretty simple. That looks pretty good. Alright, most of the rest of it's going to do with a little bit of a modeling tool, just to give ourselves some details on here. Make pieces stand out a bit. Round out all the edges, because he's a little round character. Doesn't have a lot of sharp edges. Alright, and then let's do some background on this, and then I'll do some sort of border. So for background, I'm using a little skull stamp that I made a few years ago for somebody that wanted me to put skulls on absolutely everything. And I'm going to just take and start kind of piling them up all over the place. I'm just basically putting one solid stamp on the end, and then I'm angling the tool so I don't get a full impression, so they don't overlap very much. Just going to use a camouflager around the edge. Okay, so this is dried out, and I did a little bit of stamping around where the snap's going to be, and kind of scrawled on here with the swivel knife, keep moving, which is a little dark if you get the video game reference for that little guy. But let's go ahead, and I'm going to put some dye on this, and then I'm going to put some antique stain on it, I think. Do a little bit of both. It'll put a deeper finish on it, a little bit different color than if I just antiqued it. But anyway, going to do some light brown oil dye, or well, pro dye they call it now, as our first coat. Well, probably first and second coat, because I usually put two of them on, at least. And then we'll go and put some antique stain over and over top of that. This skirting leather usually does come out a little darker, in my experience, than some other leathers that I've used. But that'll be fine. That'll look really good with this project. Alright, now, tan antique stain. It's not going to add a lot of color to it, but it will darken in the cracks and crevices and help highlight things a bit. And add just a little bit of grunginess to the whole mess. Just going to wipe over with a somewhat damp paper towel. Take off some of the excess on the surface. And even it out a little bit. Okay, now over antique stain I like to use spray finishes. This leather sheen. One of my favorites. That way I don't pick it up and smear it with the finish that I'm wiping on. Okay, let's start with our assembly on this. First things first, we're going to put a snap in, so I can cover the back of it with the lining leather. Not absolutely necessary, but also doesn't hurt. Ooh, I forgot that this leather's too thick. I had to do a little bit more complicated way of setting a snap. So when the leather is too thick, you gotta take some off the back. I'm gonna use a French edge skiver for that. You can basically use just a really wide edge beveler. Make several passes with it. That's essentially what a French edge skiver is anyway. And we'll just take a little divot out of there. And the snap will set down in the leather a little bit. We'll get a little bit more out of it. And it should set then. Gonna probably have to do that same thing with this one too. More than likely I'll take the lining out of it and then still do that. But anyway, snap set. And it's time to glue stuff together. Alright, let's try and get this finished up today. It's a new morning. I've let this glue set overnight. It should be good and cured. Now it's just time to trim everything up. Stick the welts in. Stitch it all together. Okay, now I just went downstairs and ran some stitching along the tops of these. But we're going to go ahead and put our welts together. And for that, I think I mentioned earlier, I'm just using a cut off strip of the same skirting leather. And I'm just going to glue it and shape it into place as I go. Along here, I don't have it cut to shape. But let's go ahead and cut it off to length. And we will line it up at the top here. Work our way down. And we don't have to be real precise because we'll trim it off after we've got it all together. Or as I'm putting it together is probably a better way of putting it. And then on the edge side of the blade, we're going to do the same thing. Run on down the side here. It's going to have a little bit more of a bend down here, but it should be easy enough to do. Just force that leather into shape. And that one we're going to leave a little long too. We're going to definitely have to trim that as we're going so that it'll fit into that end. But that's much easier and much less of a waste of leather than cutting one big piece for the welt. Let's just start right up here. Just stick it right along that edge. It helps that I let the contact cement go until it wasn't wet anymore. You get like it tacky and it'll just stick instantly. You can just work your way down the line like this. Then you can trim stuff up. A little bit more. Oh, glue's not sticking down there. Let's try that again. Give it something to grab onto here. Just do a little bit of kind of pre-bending there. Alright, now that we've got that stuck together, just scrape it a bit to rough it up. Do the same thing on the front piece and stick it on there. Let's see if we can throw some clamps on these. Just to hold it together for a bit. Alright, next step is going to be sewing and sanding. Okay, projects like this are why I spent $3,000 on a sewing machine. So, about 3/4. It's a little bit less than 3/4. But anyway. That's what the good, expensive sewing machines are for. Now, a 1x30 sander to sand the edges smooth, those are cheap. No excuses on that one. So, let's go ahead and finish up our edges. Alright, now that I got all my edges colored up, beveled and ready to go, we're just going to smear a bunch of gum triag on there, let that soak in a little bit, and go ahead and slick them. Okay. Alright, edges are finished up. That is a substantial sheath. A few more spots I might touch up some, you know, just things that bother me a bit. But we're pretty much done. Time to set a snap. And for that, we're going to go ahead and punch our hole. I'm going to use where I marked it before. Actually going to put it just a touch out from that. Punch through. Now, as before mentioned, this leather is too thick for these snaps. They don't have any of it that sticks through. So we need to take out our lining leather and maybe some of even our skirting leather there. To do that, I'm just going to kind of center up a hole punch. That's about a 1/2 inch hole punch. And we're just gonna pop that out of there. We're not gonna cut all the way through, obviously. We don't want to do that. But we can take out some of the extra and take out some of the skirting in there with that French edge skiver that we used before on the other snap. And then our inner piece of our snap will set down into the leather some. And that gives us plenty of room to set the snap. So just widen that hole out a little bit. Okay, our snap anvil. You see now we got plenty of it sticking out of there. And we can use our snap setter and set it down. Should be around here. There it is. Oop. Wow. There we go. So, as I said, a substantial sheath. Let's go put it on the tool and see if it fits.